Okay, so according to my clock, it's time to start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second week of the webinar series, A Carbon Neutral Society Action Month, hosted by Kyushu University and in cooperation with APRU. I'm Natalie Konomi, professor and manager of the Global Strategies Office at Kyushu University, and I will be your MC for today again. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded, of course, and if everyone agrees, we would like to temporarily upload the recordings on the APRU website. So thank you for your cooperation. Also, as you may already be aware, this event is a regular Zoom meeting, so not a Zoom webinar, which is less anonymous, we think. Therefore, if your surroundings permits, it would be really great if you could turn on your cameras throughout the event, especially during the discussion time, so that we can actually see faces. But please keep your microphones off. And for those who haven't done so yet, please also change your screen name to your name and maybe in the name of your institution or name of your university. Okay, to give you a little background about this webinar series, well, as we all know, climate change is a critical global issue affecting both society, everyone, societies and industries, and it's vital to take concrete measures toward a carbon neutral society and discuss and implement solutions that support sustainability and also economic development. So today's challenges, just to mention a few, include like increasing resource efficiency, reducing environmental impact, increasing disaster resilience, and of course, decarbonizing society. To solve these issues effectively and without, well, compromising people's well-being, we must call, I think, on the expertise and passion of all the researchers, well-established new researchers, but also next generations and younger researchers from a variety of disciplines. And with this webinar, we seek to highlight a range of research initiatives undertaken, of course, by APRU universities, but also non-APRU university members to preserve the global environment and achieve a sustainable society. And most importantly, by bringing together all of you, like really you, and a diverse group of experts and researchers from several scientific fields, we aim to tackle this climate change and develop a sustainable society. So we hope that this will encourage the exchange of ideas today and lead to discussions of potential cross-disciplinary approaches and support the collaborative development of solutions. So it's really important, we think, to continue building an international network focused on a carbon neutral society. And that's what we try here in this forum or in this webinar. So also some of you might be aware, this webinar series actually serves as a pilot for a longer term program devoted to various aspects of global environmental preservation and the realization of a sustainable decarbonized society. So we are really interested in learning how early career researchers and others with different degrees of knowledge about environmental preservation. So these are engineers, scientists, social scientists, economics, policymakers, community members, educators, just to name a few, can really collaborate and share knowledge to help in the fight against climate change. So let me just quickly introduce our outline for today. We will focus on alternative energies. And we're happy to have 3 speakers today who will each give a keynote speech of 20 minutes on their research, and followed by a short Q&A session, which will kind of direct us directly into the panel discussion, I assume. So altogether for Q&A and panel discussion, about 30 minutes again. And then we have a 10-minute break after the panel discussion before we start with our poster sessions. And I would like to briefly introduce our today's presenters in order of appearance. So I'm honored to welcome Dr. Stephen Matthew Leif from Kyushu University, and Dr. Gregory Trencher from Kyoto University, and Dr. Muhammad Aziz from the University of Tokyo. So thank you very much to the 3 of you for joining our session today. Now, I would also like to invite everyone to ask questions during the Q&A sessions and the panel discussions and actively join because we're really eager to hearing from you. And if you have questions during the presentations, please feel free to write them in the chat box the moment you have that question so that you don't forget about that question. So any time is fine. And I will address them at the Q&A session and the panel discussion again. But because it's a Zoom meeting, again, please keep in mind that you turn on your microphones only when we instruct you to do so. Okay, let's start with our keynote speeches. I would like to invite our first keynote speaker today, Associate Professor Dr. Stephen Matthew Leif from the International Research Center for Hydrogen Energy at Kyushu University. Dr. Leif works on the synthesis and characterization of nanomaterials for hydrogen-related technologies. Originally from the UK, he studied physics at Durham University and electronic engineering at the University of Surrey. In 2008, he moved to Tokyo Institute of Technology in Japan as a postdoc in a national NEDO hydrogen energy project, which is where he first began working on electrocatalysts for fuel cells. He transferred to Kyushu University as a faculty member in 2011 and currently has affiliations in the International Research Center for Hydrogen Energy, the Next Generation Fuel Cell Research Center, the Department of Automotive Science, and the International Institute for Carbon Neutral Energy Research, ICNIR, as well as being a visiting professor at the University of Sheffield in the UK. He recently received the prestigious Nice Step Research Award from the Ministry of Education of Japan for a significant contribution to science and technology. Dr. Leif will present on the mysterious island, the rise of hydrogen and fuel cells in Japan. So Dr. Leif, the floor is yours.
Okay, Natalie, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing the event and thanks to your team as well. And welcome to everybody to this event today from all around the Asia Pacific region. So yeah, thank you for the introduction. So I don't need to say too much, but yeah, I'm Stephen from Kyushu University. I've been here in Japan for about 15 years now and in Kyushu University for 11 years. So today I'm going to talk about hydrogen energy and what we're doing here in Japan and here in Kyushu University. My title is the Mysterious Island, the Rise of Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in Japan. So we'll get onto the title later on as well. So just for the context, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, but I like to think of this issue in terms of the triple threat of fossil fuels. So I think everybody is very familiar with the concept of climate change and the problems associated with that. And this is a very serious issue. But we also have the issue of public health. So when we're burning fossil fuels, we're releasing many particles into the atmosphere and other pollutants, especially PM2.5. And this causes serious issues with the air quality. And this is a really major health issue in the world, supposedly killing something like 1 in every 6 people in the world, basically. The third threat of fossil fuels is energy security. So this has always been an issue. We have things like the Gulf War and the oil shock in the 70s, which makes it difficult for nations, some nations, to get hold of sufficient energy resources. And especially at the moment, we're seeing this with the war in Ukraine, where basically Europe is very dependent on Russian oil, and when something happens, and this becomes a big issue in terms of the politics and in terms of getting energy to people directly. So the solution to burning fossil fuels, and that's the real thing we want to do, is to stop burning fossil fuels. That's going to solve a lot of issues. And the solution at the moment is mainly to through solar energy and through wind energy, also through things like nuclear and tidal energy as well. But solar and wind are the main solutions. And the amount of installed energy of these types of technologies is really increasing now, which is very good. We have issues though with these technologies, so we can't electrify everything, and we need to use this electricity effectively. And one of the big issues, I think, 2 things called intermittency and curtailment. So intermittency is just that in the daytime it's sunny, so we can get solar energy. At nighttime it's dark, so we can't get solar energy. And the same if it's a windy day or a calm day. So that kind of that's called intermittency. Sometimes we have lots of renewable energy, and sometimes we have none. So how can we solve that issue? And also we have the issue of curtailment. So sometimes nowadays, as we start to increase the amount of installed renewable energy, sometimes we have more energy than we can use. So if it's a very sunny and windy day, then we may have more electricity than we can use as a society. And that's what happens here. We have this yellow shaded region here, and this is all wasted energy. So this is just called curtailment, and that energy is simply dissipated. So we don't use it. So this is a big issue. How can we store this energy, and how can we use this energy for later on, basically, so we can kind of level out our energy requirements. Another issue is that not every sector is easy to electrify. So we can't use electricity for everything very easily. So things like industrial processes like steel manufacture and cement production, we can't use electricity very easily for these. At the moment, they rely on coal and oil. So also we have other kind of smaller scale issues like heating and cooling and mobility. So now we're using gasoline in our vehicles or aviation fuel in airplanes. For heating and cooling, many people are using kerosene or natural gas. It's very difficult to suddenly scale up electrification of these sectors as well. So we need some kind of hydrogen some sort of energy storage medium, and we need something that we can use in everyday life as a replacement for liquid and gaseous fuels like oil and gas. So one of the energy storage solutions at the moment would be batteries. So lithium-ion batteries have really come on a long way in the last few decades, and they're kind of really a part of our everyday lives now. So I'm sure all of you are looking at a device which has a lithium-ion battery in it right now. So they can be used for large-scale storage. So you have this very large battery in Australia, which is used for leveling out the energy from this wind farm behind it. And also we can use lithium-ion batteries in mobility to some extent. So we have now, the Nissan Leaf has been around for quite a while now, the Japanese electrified battery electric vehicle. And of course, you're all familiar with Tesla, I'm sure, which is now the biggest selling battery electric vehicle in the world. And I think the most highly valued car company in the world at the moment. There are issues with batteries as well, though. So batteries are really suited for short-term energy storage. So you can't use this battery to store energy over a period of months or over seasonal timescales. It's really for a few seconds or a few hours to balance out the grid demand and supply. The same with the battery electric vehicles. You're not storing energy in them for months and months. You're using the energy very quickly. In addition, the materials that we use in batteries, so the main materials are lithium, obviously, they're called lithium-ion batteries, cobalt and graphite. These are all classed as critical raw materials. These are materials that are economically important but have limited supply. So as we scale up the production of battery electric vehicles, these materials will become bottlenecks. We may have trouble to scale up the manufacture of batteries around the world. Other issues with batteries include things like ecological damage. So we're trying to make a sustainable technology, but making some of the materials is not really sustainable. So when we're purifying lithium, we make these huge purification pools, and this can cause ecological damage to the environment. The cobalt that we use in batteries is mainly mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of it's mined illegally using child labor. So this is obviously not very good. Also, batteries do sometimes cause fires. So if the battery is pierced, it can cause a fire, and this has caused recalls on several products, which has cost billions of dollars. For example, the Galaxy Note 7 from Samsung. So all these are issues, and at the same time, the demand for these materials and for the batteries is increasing rapidly. So something's got to give in the end. We can't keep on expanding indefinitely without solving all of these issues or trying to alleviate them. So this is where we come on to hydrogen. So as an alternative to batteries, or a support to batteries, and also as an alternative to physical fuels such as oil, coal, and gas. So this is where I get onto my title, so The Mysterious Island. So this was a novel by Jules Verne in 1874. And this was the first time, I think, that the concept of the hydrogen economy was really explored in literature. So in this book, they state that I believe that water will one day be employed as a fuel, that hydrogen and oxygen will furnish an inexhaustible source of heat and light. And they go into quite a bit of detail on this. It's worth a read, I think, if you're interested in hydrogen energy. So this was the first time that they were kind of inspired by the new electrolysis technologies and things to write this novel. And at the same time, I think Japan has always been regarded as a kind of mysterious island. Through 400 years of seclusion, it's maintained that kind of reputation. And currently, at the same time, where in Japan has a reputation for being a leader in the world in terms of hydrogen technologies, having invested heavily in these technologies for the past 20 years. So I think the mysterious island is a very good concept in terms of hydrogen, and especially in regards to Japan. So hydrogen's been around for a long time. That's why they were writing about it so long ago. So the first crewed hydrogen balloon was in 1873. So people actually went up quite high up in this balloon. And then airships became the main kind of intercontinental transport for quite a long time. So these airships were seen in the skies a lot from the 1850s onwards. And in Japan as well, they did kind of experiment with dirigibles with these hydrogen airships. This is the Yamada Shiki from 1911, and they made about 4 different generations of this, but it didn't take off in Japan as much as everywhere else. The problem with this early on was the Hindenburg Disaster, which many of you will have heard of in 1937, where one of these giant hydrogen blimps caught fire and exploded, and this was kind of a really big issue in the hydrogen economy at that time. Also, very early on, hydrogen has been used in lighting for a very long time. So there's when you're treating coal to make it into gas, you can make something called coal gas by heating it in the presence of water, in the presence of steam. So in the 1850s, in Japan already, as well as Europe and the rest of the world, Japan started to use it. And this is the first gas lamp in Japan. So this is down in Sakurajima in Kyushu. It looks like a normal kind of traditional Japanese stone lamp, but this was the first gas lamp in Japan. And actually this gas was a mixture of hydrogen and carbon monoxide, which was made through a process called steam reforming. This went on to light other cities in Japan, as well as the rest of the world as well. So this is a picture this is a screen print of Ginza in 1875, and the street lighting in Osaka and Tokyo was basically hydrogen for quite a while. So this method to make gas, to make hydrogen, is still used today, and still the primary way that we make hydrogen in the hydrogen economy now. So steam reforming is where we take coal, or we can do this with natural gas as well, effectively. We mix it with water, we heat it up, and the reactions that happen generate hydrogen and carbon monoxide, which we can then use as a fuel. So the hydrogen economy has kind of been around for a while, but today it's in a different state from what it was like back then. So this is a graph showing where the hydrogen comes from today. And you can see that most of this hydrogen comes from fossil fuels, from oil, coal, and gas. And some of it comes as a byproduct of the chemical industry. And on the other side over here, we can see how the hydrogen's used. A lot of this is used in oil refining, in ammonia generation, which is used for fertilizers. A very small amount is used for transport at the moment. We hope to improve that later on. Also in industrial processes and things like this, and heating as well. So this is where we are at the moment. In the future, we hope that we can start to really expand this hydrogen economy and use it in as many different sectors as possible, where we want to replace like fossil fuels in like the natural gas infrastructure. We want to switch that to hydrogen. In hydrogen vehicles, in making synthetic fuels and refining oil, as well as in industrial uses as well. So we want to use hydrogen for as many things as possible so we can avoid CO2 emissions. So in Japan, they have some prototype projects to start setting up these systems already. So this is a big famous one, which is funded by the government, as well as Kawasaki Heavy Industries, and many other players are involved as well. In this project, they're currently taking brown coal from Australia, and they're gasifying this in the way that I mentioned before to generate hydrogen and CO2. Then that CO2 is planned to be sequestered underground, and then they would liquefy this hydrogen and send it to Japan in a hydrogen ship. Then they would basically store this hydrogen in central facilities in Japan, transport it around the country, and then use it in hydrogen filling stations, for example, or in industry where it's needed. So this is quite a large project, and it's already underway. So now this ship has been built. This is the first liquid hydrogen shipping project in the world. So here you can see the big hydrogen storage chamber where they put the liquid hydrogen in. And currently, right now, or yesterday, the ship was just off Papua New Guinea on its way back from Australia to Kobe port in Japan, where it will deliver its hydrogen cargo. So this is a very exciting project, actually. But yeah, I guess maybe we can talk about more that in the Q&A sessions. Another method to store hydrogen and transport hydrogen, and this is another large project in Japan, is to use other materials to kind of stick the hydrogen onto. So this is a project called the AHEAD project, another big international and industry collaboration. In this case, they make hydrogen in Brunei. They react the hydrogen with toluene to create methyl cyclohexane, which is say MCH, and then they transport that organic molecule, this liquid organic molecule, to Japan in conventional chemical storage tanks, and then they supply it on the other side. This has the advantage of being able to use existing infrastructure for hydrocarbons, so we don't need special ships, and we don't need to invest money up front to store hydrogen like this. Another kind of industry project, this is a Mitsubishi kind of project where they want to use use waste like sewage to make hydrogen. So you can use biological processes to generate hydrogen from waste. And if we can use this to power cars, for example, this would be a really nice green and closed carbon cycle way to make hydrogen. This is a filling station in Kitakyushu, which is just up the coast from us, which uses this biohydrogen gas. So I want to talk mainly about fuel cells today. So a fuel cell is kind of a key in the hydrogen economy. So it's a method to convert hydrogen into electricity. So this is a way that we can use hydrogen to electrify different sectors after we've stored it for a while. So basically, it's just reacting hydrogen and oxygen together in an electrochemical process, which is similar to a battery, and making electricity and heat and water. So the most the biggest project involving these fuel cells at the moment, the biggest commercial project, is the Enefarm. So this is an example of the Type S Enefarm, and now there's a new mini Enefarm. And these go on the side of your house, and they take city gas or natural gas, and they convert that natural gas to hydrogen, and then that hydrogen is converted to electricity and hot water. So they've already sold about 300,000 units, and this price of this is about 800,000 yen, which is something like $8,000 US. So quite expensive still at the moment, but they're very efficient, and you can make your money back at the moment in about 8 years. And the aim is to make that payback time more like 5 years. There are also bigger fuel cells. So these are SOFCs, which are higher temperature fuel cells. This is the one just outside my lab with my boss, Professor Sasaki. This is made by Mitsubishi Hitachi collaboration. And there are about 10 or more of these now installed around Japan, providing clean power, off-grid power effectively for various different businesses. And now they're scaling up these to kind of 1 megawatt scale units. In terms of mobility, Japan's been at the forefront for quite a while in terms of fuel cell electric vehicles. So in the 90s, they were already making prototype fuel cell vehicles. In this case, they were using metal hydrides as a hydrogen storage medium. And more recently, we've switched to compressed hydrogen tanks. So Toyota and Mazda and Honda were all making prototype fuel cell vehicles. And then more recently, Toyota made the first commercially available fuel cell electric vehicle in the world. So this is the Toyota Mirai, released in 2016. Mirai means future in Japanese. We're already onto the second generation of this fuel cell vehicle. So this is the second generation Mirai, which was released in 2020. So they had an event in a local shopping center, so I could go and see it quite early. And the advantage of this over battery electric vehicles is that the range is very good. So this one has a range of 650 kilometers, but it's actually driven a record of 1,360 kilometers on a single tank of hydrogen. The pressure is quite high, so 70 megapascals, hydrogen tanks, and it can hold about 6 kilograms of hydrogen, which can get you this 1,360 kilometers in ideal conditions. It's still quite expensive. It's like a luxury end car, basically around 60,000 euros or so. So the advantage of fuel cell electric vehicles over batteries really comes into play at larger scales. So when you have vehicles that can go further and that are heavier, then that's when fuel cells become much more economically viable compared to batteries. So here, these red circles represent crossover points or equivalence points between the cost of the vehicle and the driving range. So you can see with a normal car around 850 kilometers, then that makes a fuel cell electric vehicle much more economically viable than a battery electric vehicle. But for a larger vehicle like a truck, that range comes down to 400 kilometers. So already today, trucks and buses and trains makes much more sense to use fuel cells rather than battery electric vehicles for larger vehicles. So now we already have a kind of a nice family of different fuel cell electric vehicles in Japan. So we had an event on campus last year where Toyota showcased their new fuel cell electric vehicles. So you can see this nice range of kind of large like minivans up to buses. Now trucks are becoming very popular, fuel cell electric vehicle trucks. Forklifts, there's tens of thousands of fuel cell forklifts in the world. And more recently, in the last few years, fuel cell drones, fuel cell trains, this is a new Hitachi fuel cell train, and fuel cell boats, this is a Yanmar boat, are now becoming more and more popular. So just in, last time I went to Tokyo in December, I was in Ginza and I saw a fuel cell bus in the wild, which is very nice to see. And this is just a few hundred meters away from this hydrogen gas lamp, which was around kind of 150 years earlier on. So it was nice to see this type of thing. The next generation of fuel cells are kind of already planning this Toyota JAXA collaboration for the next crewed rover on the moon in the next, maybe I think in 2030. Robots may be a good kind of application for fuel cells. This robot looks quite scary actually. This robot was powered by a fuel cell as well. Okay, so I don't have really any time left, but Kyushu University has a reputation as being one of the kind of focal points of hydrogen research in the world. We have many industrial collaborations, many different institutes and demonstration projects on the campus. We've got a Department of Hydrogen Energy Systems where you can come and learn about hydrogen at graduate level, many different events as well. So if you're interested, then do please come and visit. And very, very briefly, my interest in fuel cells, a lot of it stems from replacing platinum. So platinum is a critical raw material and it's limited. So basically, yeah, I'm working on kind of bio-inspired catalysts. We take inspiration from the catalysts in nature, like hemoglobin, for example, or chlorophyll. We try to recreate these kind of catalytic structures embedded in carbon scaffolds. And we are making these catalysts in the lab in a very simple process. It's not so difficult, very similar to just making bread, for example. And eventually we can make catalysts which are not using platinum, but can still catalyze the oxygen reduction reaction. And we can use them in fuel cells, and they're comparable to commercial platinum-free catalysts as well. But yeah, maybe we can talk about that later on. So just to end on a kind of positive note, so this is the CO2 emissions in Japan since 1970. I think this is a similar situation in many developed economies. Over the past few years, the CO2 emissions have been decreasing. So there is promise for the future for reducing emissions and preventing climate change, but we still have a long way to go. And I hope that hydrogen can play an important role in this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Leif, for this very, very inspiring talk. I learned a lot, actually. So we already have a number of questions which we will take a look at during the Q&A session. So we will first continue with our other two speakers. So just write your questions in the chat for now to not forget your questions. I would now like to invite our second speaker for today. This will be Associate Professor Gregory Trencher at the Graduate School of Global Environmental Studies at Kyoto University in Japan. He obtained a PhD in sustainable science from the University of Tokyo and previously held posts at Clark University in the United States and Tohoku University in Japan. His research specializes in three areas or points. Number one would be policies and processes that drive or hamper the transition to sustainable energy and mobility systems, as well as cities. Second would be the phase out of environmentally unsustainable substances, technologies, and processes. And the third one will be decarbonization strategies in fossil fuel-centric industries. He serves as an editor for the journal Energy Research and Social Science, as well as Frontiers in Sustainable Cities. He has published more than 35 publications in leading journals like PLOS One, Energy Policy, Energy Research and Social Science, and many more. Dr. Trencher will be talking about bumps on the road to hydrogen mobility, experiences from Japan, California, and Germany. So Dr. Trencher, please.
Sure. Good afternoon. Good morning and good evening to our guests all around the world. Thank you very much to Kyoto University for this, Kyushu University for this invitation to talk with you all today. I was listening with fascination to the presentation from Dr. Leif just a moment ago. I myself am a big fan of hydrogen. However, my presentation is going to focus on mobility, and it's going to focus on some of the more kind of, negative issues that we're sort of seeing here. Maybe you could call these growing pains, like as we see the emergence of a new market. But for some people, this might be sort of, the end of maybe a non-reversible sort of death spiral for hydrogen mobility in the light duty sector. But who knows? It's early days. Let's begin the presentation. So for many people around the world, I guess you're familiar with this idea that there's a battle occurring between battery electric vehicles, which I think many of you are very well aware of, and fuel cell electric vehicles, which we had a very nice introduction to a moment ago. So these are both electric vehicle technologies. So that's why some researchers like to include this E here. So the fuel cell electric vehicle is also an electric vehicle, but the difference is that the battery is running by electricity that's sort of stored in a battery, whereas the fuel cell electric vehicle is producing electricity from hydrogen that's stored on board. And so these are two technologies that, ideally would be complementary to each other because they have strengths and weaknesses. And some markets around the world, for example, especially here in Japan, but also our next door neighbor, Korea, China, some in America, especially California, and then some European countries, they're looking to both of these technologies. So I'm going to call these BEVs today to save words, BEVs and FCEVs. So these are looked to, power the electric mobility transition for several countries. However, if we look at the number of on-road vehicles around the world, the number is extremely small for fuel cell vehicles. If we put these on a graph, we can't even see the number of fuel cell vehicles. It's basically right now 11 million battery electric vehicles driving around on the roads. And as we were mentioned in the previous presentation, Tesla is a big leading seller here. But however, there is very high interest in fuel cell electric vehicles in the passenger market. And that's because they have several advantages. So one is that they are very well suited for larger platforms. So we had the photographs a moment ago of trucks and buses, but also SUVs and four-wheel drives, for example. And this is important for big countries where people drive very long distances with large cars. There's a lot of emphasis on using hydrogen in the heavy-duty market, for buses and trucks. However, the number of units that are sold every year for buses and trucks is very low compared to passenger vehicles. So if we can also deploy fuel cells in the passenger vehicle market, we're going to produce a large number of parts, which will then drive down the cost of these parts through economies of scale, which will have spillover impacts for other industries. Another thing is that battery electric vehicles require charging stations. And these charging stations take up land. And in Asia, and cities like New York and San Francisco, there's not much land. So that's why hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are attractive, because we can actually use the existing gasoline station infrastructure to serve these vehicles, which is very important because many people live in rental properties or multi-family apartments that cannot install a charger at home. And then we have, again, this attractive driving ranges and refueling time. So not only are fuel cell vehicles suited for driving long distances, they also can be refueled in just a few minutes. And then we also have this other thing with these issues about critical raw materials was raised a moment ago. Fuel cell vehicles having smaller batteries, they use less of these materials. So this is very, very important, probably for the future when these limited supplies are strained. So California, Germany, and Japan are three countries that I focused my research on. And these are three leading markets, and that's because, you know, for many decades, they've led the world in terms of testing vehicles and developing vehicles, in terms of selling these vehicles, and in terms of building the refueling station infrastructure. And Japan is especially, you know, special in this trio of countries here, because we have two companies, Toyota and Honda, which currently are producing vehicles. Honda is currently having, we could call them like a sabbatical, maybe a little holiday. They're doing their homework. They're rumored to come back in the market this year. There's a long history of research and development for fuel cells for both stationary and mobile applications in Japan. And so they're a big part of the government's electrification strategy for road mobility. So here's a little summary of the figures around the world to summarize the global situation. So a big, an important number to remember is that there's only 42,000 vehicles on the roads today around the world. Most of these actually are in these three countries. So about 3 countries make up half the global market. And California has the largest number of about 10,000 of these vehicles. We have a much, much smaller number of these fuel cell buses, but Japan is kind of like the champion here. And then we have also a very important indicator of market growth, which is the number of refueling stations. And Japan currently has about 160 of these, which is much more than California and Germany. And so these different, the ratio between the number of fuel cell vehicles on the road and the number of refueling stations means that these countries have different ratios. So this basically means that California's stations, which are here, there are many, many vehicles for one station. Whereas in Germany, it's the opposite situation. We have a very low number of vehicles per station, which basically means in Germany, the stations are going bankrupt. So this is not really sort of, a theoretical sort of academic sort of, exercise. You can actually go around in Japan. That's one of the nice things. You can sort of see, these little beacons or these symbols of progress towards the materialization of a so-called hydrogen society. So here is a very symbolic, beautiful refueling station, which is in Roppongi near the symbolic Roppongi Tower, Tokyo Tower, sorry. What's unique about Japan is that we build these stations from scratch. They're greenfield stations. Whereas in other countries like Germany and California, they retrofit. They take an existing gasoline station and they add the pumps, the so-called pumps. So it's much, much faster and cheaper to build in the brownfield retrofit model than this type of model. Steve had a nice photograph of himself in Ginza of a bus. I kind of feel like I'm sort of your competitor because I was also in Tokyo before COVID. And I took this photograph in front of the Tokyo station. And actually, I was very happy about this photograph because I was actually going to an interview with, I forget who the interview was with. It might have been actually with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry for my hydrogen fuel cell mobility research. So I was very happy to see a tangible symbol of this. And then I used to live in, I used to work at Tohoku University. So, and I used to live in Sendai. And this is the street I used to live on. And I was very happy because here is actually a private vehicle. So this is, rumor has it that he's a doctor and he's bought this vehicle. And there's only one refueling station in the city of Sendai. And I'm amazed that he's actually bought this vehicle. And rumor has it, he's probably bought it with his company money. It's probably a company car. But a nice thing I would like to show, this is my personal pride, is I don't think many people have seen a fuel cell vehicle in the snow before. So this is the same vehicle before and after the snowstorm. And one of the nice things about fuel cell vehicles is they are very strong at starting in cold conditions. So batteries can actually be damaged by low temperatures. So fuel cell vehicles, in theory, will be strong in cold weather. So we had a similar graph from Dr. Leif a moment ago, where we spoke about the idea that batteries are very, very good for short distances for small vehicles. And the idea is that hydrogen vehicles would be very suitable for large vehicles for long distances. And the idea is that, sedans, like, these kind of like the taxi type of vehicle, can be served by both technologies. This is the traditional view, however. And this is, you could call this the old-fashioned view. And this thinking has actually changed because now we have this amazing progress of batteries. So batteries that were expected to be for, short driving distances for small vehicles. Look at this. We have not just a bus, it's a long bus with a trailer. And this is produced by a Chinese company, BYD, that's now the world leader in producing battery electric buses. You will not find Japanese companies producing this. Look at this. This is a pickup truck. This is a big, big four-wheel drive produced by Ford in America, available this year with a driving range, if I'm not mistaken, of about 300 kilometers. Extremely powerful. Batteries are making amazing progress. They're actually becoming much more faster and easier to produce. And the progress is much faster than many people expected, which means that we have to revise this thinking here. The idea is that probably hydrogen would actually be suited for very, very heavy duty vehicles like trains and ships. And yes, we can use hydrogen for sedans, and yes, we can use them for trucks, but actually batteries is the competition that's increasingly coming in here. So due to these improvements in battery performance, battery electric vehicles are going to perform many roles that we thought hydrogen would perform. So that means that hydrogen is being increasingly pushed towards this heavy duty space, like ships, trucks, very, very large trucks like you'll see like in America, and also trains. I'm not telling you all that we're not going to see hydrogen in this sedan space or this space here. That's not my position at all, but it's just a bit of a sort of, I think we shouldn't take for granted that hydrogen is only good for, that hydrogen is very suitable for these sectors. So let's look at the barriers to the diffusion of these vehicles. It might get a little bit depressing for you here, so please put on your seatbelt. We have 3 countries that we're going to be focusing on: Germany, Japan, and California. And so a question is, how can we increase the supply of fuel cell vehicles? And to do this, we should be thinking about, how to accelerate the technological progress and how to lower the costs of production. So in Germany and Japan, basically the strategy has been for the government to be very kind to industry and to help them by supporting their R&D. And the effect on stimulating FC fuel cell vehicle production is very uncertain. And the government works with industry to develop testing platforms and to help the industry competitors, for example, getting Toyota to talk to Honda, for example, who are competitors. And again, the effect on stimulating FCV production is very uncertain. Japan has had another approach where Toyota has voluntarily decided to open up all its patents and say to companies, if you want to use these patents to produce fuel cell vehicles, you can. And they also supply fuel cell stack systems to other companies. Again, the effect on stimulating the fuel cell market is uncertain. Whereas in California, the government uses regulation. They say to a company, including Toyota, if you want to sell cars in California, you have to supply a minimum ratio of zero emission vehicles. That can be batteries or that can be fuel cell, you choose. But the idea is this is forcing these car makers to supply a minimum amount of electric vehicles. And then fuel cell vehicles get a reward because they get a lot of credits because they can drive a long way. So there's California's been actually very successful here, whereas Japan and Germany have been unsuccessful in stimulating production. So the situation is that fuel cell vehicle production is very limited and it's not enough to drive the market growth. So in Japan, we only have 7,000 of these vehicles driving around, but the government was aiming for 40,000 by the end of 2020. And that also doesn't account for the previous historical figure, which was, I think, set for 2013, 2014, where the government was aiming to have a large number of fuel cell vehicles on the roads. So historically, we keep missing these targets. Today, only Toyota is producing the vehicles. Honda has suspended its vehicle production. I was in a seminar recently, and there was a rumor by a representative from Honda that said he very confidently, he said, please look forward to the end of this year where we're going to give you further information. So we can expect them to come back into the party. They had some technical problems, which we think would be behind their suspension of the production. Germany, nobody is producing fuel cell vehicles in Germany. This is a big problem, because that means if you're going to, if you're a politician in Germany saying we support fuel cell vehicles, that basically means we support Japanese makers and Korean makers, which are the competition. And so it really is not working in Germany. We need these German car companies to come into the market. So BMW finally is expected to release a SUV, but it's going to be in very, very limited volume. Their focus is on battery electric vehicles. So Germany really is focusing on battery electric vehicles with a very limited role for hydrogen. This has changed historically. So why is Germany and why are other countries choosing battery electric vehicles? That's because we have all these barriers that are much lower in that battery, in the BEV market. The barriers include cost. It's very difficult to produce fuel cells in high volume at a low cost. The infrastructure, there's not really enough refueling stations to allow people to drive around without inconveniences. And that stops these companies from supplying the vehicles. And then time, it takes up a long time to build the part supply chains, because fuel cell vehicles contain a very large number of parts, very comparable actually to a regular gasoline vehicle. Whereas a BEV contains fewer parts, so the supply chains are much easier, and you can actually just profit from existing supply chains, existing networks in the market. So this is a big barriers that are very expensive and time-consuming to overcome. Infrastructure. This is another important thing. We have to build refueling stations, and we have to do this at a low cost. So we have here a photograph of, again, Japanese-style refueling station. This is, again, in Sendai. This is being built from scratch. It's a greenfield development. We have a pump here, and it's just like the existing gasoline-style paradigm where the vehicle goes in, the driver gets out, and you refuel this vehicle. There's a tank in there, and then you drive away, and that energy is then converted to electricity, and you have to pay for this energy. It costs about 1,000 yen per kilogram, and in the new Mirai, this will cost you 6,000 yen for a driving range of about 700 kilometers. So it's about the same driving range as, the same running cost as a hybrid vehicle. So Japan has 140 of these, but including in this number are some of these truck stations. So it's not really a refueling station. It's kind of cheating, in my opinion, because there's no refueling station here, but the truck goes there once a week. So on the map, they tick this and say this is a station. So we have 140 of these. Their goal is to build 320 by 2025. We're on track to achieve this. And we're looking to build 1,000 by 2030. That's the same as California, by the way, 1,000 by 2030. So the government in all these three countries, Germany, California, and Japan, the government basically supplies 50% of the construction costs. So that's working. And then we have operation support where Germany does nothing. So they have a very low number of vehicles using these stations. The stations are going bankrupt, but the government doesn't help them. Whereas in Japan, the government helps them. The Japanese government and other companies, this is basically car manufacturers, they provide revenue to these refueling stations. But in California, they like to use policy. So they have market mechanisms, which basically give an incentive. If you sell hydrogen fuel, you can basically create carbon credits. You can sell these carbon credits, ironically, to oil companies and make money for this, which gives you an incentive to sell hydrogen. And the government also gives payments to large hydrogen stations because a lot of these larger stations are unused because the pumps are not being used. So that's the situation. So basically, we have lots of underused stations in Germany and Japan because the vehicle ratio to the number of stations is very low, especially Germany. And that's why in an interview in Germany, somebody told me that the business case is a nightmare. I had other adjectives like it's just a waste of money. These pumps are sitting around gathering dust. Whereas in California, it's the opposite situation. The stations are overused. And because of this, we're having breakdowns because there's a very high vehicle to station ratio. So actually, if you go to California in certain days, you will actually see very strange situation. You'll never see this in Germany, where these Toyota Mirais are actually queuing up to get into the station to refuel up. I think it's a Honda Clarity here. So there's a line of stations, and then there's an FCV owner that's complaining on Twitter. And then we have here the website that you can go to and look at the station conditions, and you'll frequently see stations are breaking down. And they're breaking down because this is a new technology that's been really stressed. But this is a big problem because don't forget, here's gasoline pumps, and gasoline pumps will never break down. So for a hydrogen pump to break down, this sends a very negative message to drivers that we can't trust this technology. And so this is damaging the public reputation of this technology. And some drivers are actually abandoning the technology. They were fans, they loved their Tesla, they loved their Mirai, and actually they've decided to sell these and to not use them again because of inconveniences. And this is also constraining the ability of the vehicle makers to produce these vehicles. So another issue is adoption. So, okay, there's inconvenience, they're expensive. How can we encourage drivers to buy fuel cell vehicles? So all three countries have the same approach. Basically, we use subsidies. So basically, in Japan, we get the biggest subsidy. This is just amazing. We give drivers almost, $20,000 US. And on top of this, the Tokyo metropolitan government will give you big incentives. So basically, the Japanese government at the local and domestic, at the regional level, is covering about 40% of the upfront cost. This is huge. So big incentives for the purchase, which is much bigger than Germany, much bigger than California. However, for like ownership incentives, they're very low. So Japan gives tax reductions that are very, very small. But California has a small subsidy in the beginning, but a big ownership incentive. They basically, Toyota and Honda give the driver free fuel. I'll repeat this, there's no mistake, free fuel for 3 years or for $15,000 US. The reason they do this is not because they're kind, it's because they have no choice. Gasoline is so cheap in America. If the fuel cell vehicle is competing with a gasoline vehicle, people will just choose gasoline because historically gasoline has been very privileged by federal policy. It's very cheap. So the car companies have had to compete with this with their own money. So basically, every time Toyota sells a car to California, they're losing money. And then car drivers get the free use of these carpool lanes. And they also have leases in California. So that explains why there's so many sales of these vehicles in California, which are actually not sales, they're mainly leases. However, running costs are still too high. They're higher than BEVs. So the incentive to buy a fuel cell vehicle is low. And because of this, most fuel cell vehicles are being bought by companies and by local governments, not by private drivers. So interviews in Germany, a stakeholder said, I've never seen one private fuel cell vehicle in Germany before. People in California say, if we don't see them on the streets, why would we go and buy them? And then another company in Germany said, what we need is a fuel cell Tesla, because Tesla's just creating such a big presence in the world. So without Tesla, there wouldn't be all this hype about fuel cell vehicles. So we need a fuel cell version of Tesla. And so this is the summary, the final slide. So basically, the speed of fuel cell vehicle rollouts around the world in the 3 leading markets is actually very, very slow. And the main reasons are quite simple. There's a very low supply of these vehicles. There's not many car companies making them. And even when they make them, the number's very limited. They're very expensive to buy. They're very expensive to produce. And the amount of refueling stations is limited. But there are some positive signs. I thought I wouldn't depress you all with this. So Hyundai, the Korean maker, is coming into the Japanese market this year. And Honda, again, this is a rumor, but I think it seems to be quite reputable, that they're going to re-enter the market this year. And what I heard in the sort of the session was that they might even have several vehicles. And then all 3 markets are, in other words, California, Germany, and Japan, continue to rebuild their refueling infrastructure. They're expanding this. So this is the end of my presentation. I've got several papers on these topics. There's a very easy to read sort of 5-minute read in a journal in Australia. So there's my contact email. So thank you very much for your time. Sorry to go over time.
Thank you very much, Professor Trencher, for this very stimulating talk. To our audience, as a reminder, please feel free to post your questions in the chat so that you don't forget them for the Q&A and panel discussion session. So I would now like to welcome our next and final keynote speaker for today, Dr. Muhammad Aziz, Dr. Aziz is currently an associate professor at the Institute of Industrial Science at the University of Tokyo. He worked previously as an associate professor and assistant professor at Tokyo Institute of Technology, researcher at the Institute of Industrial Science at the University of Tokyo, and a mechanical designer at Seiko Epson Corporation. He received his bachelor, master's, and doctorate engineering degrees from Kyushu University in Japan in 2004, 6, and 8, respectively, in the field of mechanical engineering. His general research areas are advanced clean energy systems, and his research interests include energy conversion, renewable energy utilization, energy modeling, advanced combustion, electric vehicle, battery, and hydrogen production, storage and transportation, and utilization. So Dr. Aziz will talk about perspectives of carbon-free energy sources in the decarbonized society. So Dr. Aziz, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Natalie, and also thanks for a great presentation, Prof. Lith, and also Prof. Answers. Actually, my thought today is quite general, but some points are also strongly correlated with Professor Lith and also transfers. So let me just underline your great presentations in my presentations also. Okay, so my today topics will be correlated with the perspectives of carbon-free energy sources in the decarbonized society. I'm Aziz from the University of Tokyo, and as Professor Natalie Kanami mentioned previously, that now basically we are working on energy systems, how we are dealing with any kind of hydrogen production, storage, utilizations, and also utilization of several technologies, including also vehicle-to-grid technology, and etc. So I would like to introduce some research of our labs. So that's why I think you can have any kind of big pictures about what we are doing currently. And we would like to start from quite general issues that now in Japan, we are focusing on the idea for the changes or transitions, and usually we call it as the Society 5.0, while in the Europeans, especially from Germany, we have also another perspective for the Industry 4.0. But in Society 5.0, we are basically focusing on the civilization-based improvements or humans developments in this case. And we are assuming, we are believing that any kind of transformation, including digital transformation, green transformations, or any kind of transformations is a tool. So this is not the main targets or the objectives of our developments. But the great developments, the great objectives of our developments is more focusing on how we can facilitate our creativity, our imaginations as the human itself. Humans mean the subjects of the change, the subject of the transition itself. So the objectives for the Society 5.0 in here not only solve the problems that we are currently facing, but also how we can give any kind of value creations to the society. So we have any kind of, we can improve our social developments, any kind of development in the society, not only technological aspect or any kind of economy. And when we are talking about the energy, let me just to underline or emphasize that we have three different pillars in energy sustainability. We have energy security, we have energy equity, and finally also is correlated with environmental sustainability. When we are talking about the energy security, we are not only talking about the security in terms of quantity. So how we can securely supply the demands of the electricity, of the energy that we need, but also in terms of the quality, how we can provide the energy in terms of the good quality for all of the stakeholders. So, and especially when we are talking about the renewable energy storage, in the future means that the fluctuation itself not only occurs in demands side, but also will be occurring also in the supply side. So when we are dealing with any kind of renewable energy means that they are fluctuating. So we are dealing with this both fluctuations in both sides. And also when we are talking about the energy equity means that we are also providing any kind of a great opportunity. Equal opportunities to all of the stakeholders, not only to the producers, but also to the consumer side. So I think some of you are also quite familiar with the word of prosumers, producer, and also consumers means that in the futures, producers and also consumers can behave in simultaneous manners. We can behave also as the consumers, but also we can behave also as the energy producer. So we can sell the energy produced, whether it by any kind of renewable energy or etc. And finally, also we have the environmental sustainability, but I think all of you are quite familiar with that. And then we would like to map the SDGs set by the United Nations. I think these 3 pillars of energy sustainability have a quite strong correlation with the SDGs, although it cannot cover all the SDGs. But I think most of the SDGs can be facilitated well by this kind of energy, 3 pillars of energy sustainability. So when we are talking the sustainability, I think this is quite general issues, but basically we define it as the we would like to fulfill. We want to satisfy our demands currently, but at the same time also these kind of fulfilling or demands itself will not give any kind of harm or damage to our future generations. So I think this is very important for all of us, and this kind of sustainability usually is correlated strongly with any kind of economy, social, and also environmental interests, as also it has been defined previously in the energy 3 pillars in energy sustainability. And now we are in energy transitions period. Some countries, especially like Japan, we have set to achieve zero carbon 2050, and also some other countries like China and some Asian countries also things we have set like 2050, 2060, something like that. Yeah, we are not debating whether this kind of target is really feasible or not, but basically now we have agreements in this case that, or commitment in this case, that we would like to have any kind of more energy transitions to facilitate more better energy provisions in the futures. So when we are talking about the energy transitions, minimally we will cover 4 different pillars aspects, including the decarbonization and the electrification sectors, which covers, I think, the biggest energy amount, and also the decarbonizations, but non-electrified sectors. And the third one is correlated with the energy productivity or energy efficiency, how we can improve the energy efficiency of our systems. And finally, in case that we cannot have these three options, finally, how we can actually set any kind of or select any kind of scenario which finally can minimize or can produce a minimum CO2 or any kind of GHG into our atmosphere. And unfortunately, when we are dealing with energy transitions, we are also dealing with several concerns, including environmental, economic, and also social aspects. For the environmental, we have any kind of like carbons. We have also the correlations among the energy, air, water, soil, food, and etc. And also for the economic, we are dealing also with any kind of job creations or etc. But also for the socials, actually we are dealing also with the kind of cultures and also mindset. And I think this is the big pictures when we are talking about the energy system in the futures. I think there will be any kind of big changes in the futures. And now currently we are living under this kind of conditions. Now, basically, especially when we are talking about the electricity itself is covered mainly by any kind of baseload generators, including coal, gas, geothermals, hydro, or etc. But unfortunately, because we are assuming or we are predicting that in futures that renewable energy share will increase, and also the share of the fossil-based power generator will decrease. So it means that the baseload generator also itself will be decreasing in the futures. And now currently we are dealing with any kind of problems, any kind of curtailments of renewable energy, because the limitations of the grid to adjust or to cover the fluctuation itself. But in the futures, maybe we need to not doing any kind of curtailment anymore. How we can facilitate maximally or optimally all the resources available, especially from the renewable energy. So it means that what we would like to do in the futures is that how we can have very responsive energy systems to cover that. Whether we would like to have any kind of secondary energy resources, including the electricity, how to store, and also how to facilitate the charging, also dischargings, and also any kind of maybe more long-term energy storage, including hydrogens, ammonia, or any kind of other energy storage. And when we are talking also about when we achieve the zero carbon in 2050 or 2060, what we like to have after that, we need also to figure out. So the pay net zero conditions in this case, okay, at that point, we can have any kind of optimization of renewable energy. So maximize all the renewable energy sources available in our regions. And also the important thing is that primary energy resources, unfortunately, will not be used directly in our daily life. We cannot imagine that we use any kind of hydropower or for our house, actually. So basically, we use the electricity generated by hydropower, by wind turbines, or etc., or any kind of chemical fuels, maybe chemical fuels as Professor Late and Professor mentioned previously, like hydrogens or hydrogen-based fuels, including ammonia, will be also a very strong candidate in this case. And also, finally, when we are talking about the CO2, now we are dealing with any kind of problem for the positive CO2 generations. But in the futures, we are also assuming that we can be able to control the CO2 generations, not be positive, not be zero itself, but also we can have any kind of negative CO2 generations. So we can control the CO2 generation itself, whether we would like to have any kind of positive CO2 generations, zero or net zero CO2 generations, or finally, maybe we can have any kind of negative CO2 generations. Yeah, there are some aspects that we can have over the years, like including CO2 utilization, carbon tax scenarios, or etc. And this is the important thing is that some countries, or I think most of the countries in the world, actually, we set any kind of zero carbon target in 2050, 2070, or something like that. The most important things for me is that we need to have any kind of adaptive energy transitions. Because what? Because every countries, every regions actually have different conditions, have different mindset, have different cultures. So it means that one conditions or successful conditions, successful stories in one country cannot be copied directly to another country. So in this case, like success story in Europeans, maybe will be the reference case, but it cannot be copied directly for any kind of tropical countries. Tropical countries will have different conditions. So that's why we need any kind of more wise, also adaptive energy transition in this case. And the important things in this aspect also is that how we can actually behave or change our behaviors in this case. We shape our consumption's behaviors, not only to be the kings in the, because we are the consumers, mean that we need to be served. So in the futures, we are not having any more this kind of mindset. We need to be any kind of flexible, dynamics, adaptive behavior in this case, because we have also responsibility to the energy systems, our society. And so that's why there is any kind of idea correlated with the demand response in this case. So when we set any kind of different price or dynamic price for electricity and also for the energy, we can also behave accordingly, according to the different price of the electricity or the energy. And also this is the energy transitions correlations with the circular economy, but I think I just would like to skip it. This is the connected community energy management that we are now still working on that. In the futures, all of the stakeholders, producers, transmission, distributions, or any kind of storage, and also the consumer itself will share the big data together. So it means that we can have any kind of more accurate predictions. So, or also maybe any kind of open market together. So that's why the idea of prosumers, as I have mentioned previously, will also valid in the futures. And this is the smart energy system also, but I think I just have a limited time in this case. This is the smart electricity grid. And when we would like to talk about the carbon secondary resources, previously I mentioned about the primary energy sources, but now currently as the convenience, more convenience energy for consumption itself is basically the secondary energy resources. So what kind of secondary energy resources that are quite that are quite promising for us. I think, in my opinions, we have four different secondary energy resources in here. So we have electricity, which is, I think, is the most convenient ones. And then we have also hydrogen-based. For the chemical fuels, basically, we have two options, carbon-based or hydrogen-based, or the mix between them. But when we are dealing with the carbon-based means that we are still dealing with any kind of CO2 emissions. So in this case, how we can shift from carbons into hydrogen-based chemical fuels over years. So in this case, we can have hydrogen, also ammonia, or any kind of derivatives from this. And also we have also another option for the metal fuels. We can have any kind of aluminums, irons, manganese-based materials for years. So it means that we can use this kind of metal fuels and oxidize them. We can get any kind of heat from that, and we can generate the electricity. We can generate also the hydrogen from that. And finally, also we have heat. How the problem is that how we can actually facilitate this kind of mutual conversion and utilization of these four different forms of carbon-free secondary energy resources. That's, I think, the main key aspects or the main key technologies in the future also. And this is also, I think, Professor Late has mentioned also previously about the correlations between the electricity and also hydrogen-based fuels over years, but I just would like to skip it. And also, this is one idea that's how we can actually re-evaluating or revaluing the biomass itself. As we understand that biomass has the longest story in our human life as the energy supply, actually. But unfortunately, when we are talking about the biomass currently, we are still facing about the economic challenge of the biomass itself. So it means that how we can re-evaluate and revalue the biomass itself. So there are some characteristics of the biomass, and the technology for converting or harvesting the energy from biomass is basically quite matured. But the problem is that how we can have scenarios that can facilitate well this kind of biomass in our energy systems. So basically the characteristics related to storability, flexibility are very important for the biomass itself. And also in the futures, in case that adjustable energy sources will have any kind of more better price compared with unadjustable energy sources or fluctuating energy sources. So that's why I think biomass in this case is because it is storable and also it is quite flexible. It can be it can enjoy any kind of premium services in the future or premium price in the futures. And this is the mutual conversions among the secondary energy resources, including the electricity, chemical energy over years. We have any kind of power to gas technology also, especially like when we take a look at a German case. In northern Germany, basically, there are a lot of wind turbines for that. But unfortunately, the electricity generated in the northern part of Germany cannot be delivered to the southern part of Germany because of what? Because of the grid limitations. So it means that the electricity cannot be delivered to the southern part of Germany. And finally, the idea is that how we can convert the electricity or the surplus electricity generated in the northern part of Germany to the gas, to the hydrogen, also to methanes. And then this kind of hydrogen and methanes can be injected to the gas pipelines in Germany. So it can be delivered to the consumption site. And so we have also thermal energy over years. I just would like to skip this one because Professor Late and also Professor Trancher has mentioned previously also. And this is a big scenario for the hydrogen or ammonia fuels over years. Like for the transportations, yes, it will also dominate. But maybe I have quite different perspective in this case that especially for the transportation sectors, it really demands for transportation, which demands for any kind of high gravimetric energy density, including the aviations, maritimes, trains, or etc. But for like passenger cars, I think we will have any kind of great challenge with any kind of battery-based electric vehicles. And also the great utilizations of the hydrogen itself is how we can replace the current power generation which is based on fossil fuels, coals, and also gas, or etc. And another quite important topic is related with how we can deal with any kind of utilizations of electric vehicles. And this is one research that we have done previously. We have about 10 years research related with vehicle-to-grid utilization, whether in Japan, also in Europeans, especially when we have one big project in Denmark. It correlates with any kind of vehicle grid integrations. As you could see that I think Denmark is quite flat country, and it is very challenging for them to build any kind of high energy, electricity storage, like hydropower or etc. So basically, the idea is that how we can motivate the citizens to buy the electric vehicles, and the electric vehicles can be utilized for the grid, for ancillary services to the grid. And there are some different services that they can be provided by electric vehicles, including whether it can be connected directly to transmission, distribution, or renewable energy services over years. But basically, we are dealing with any kind of qualitative service over here. So that's why the electricity or the service, the price of the service itself is really quite premium, quite high. So in case of the Denmark itself, we can enjoy up to 100 times of the regular price of the electricity. So in 1 month, in our study case, is that the owner of the electric vehicles, in case that they have any kind of frequency regulations services, they can enjoy about like in yen, it is about 20,000 yen as the passive income for them. So that's why it is really a great income also for the owners or for the drivers. So we can have aggregators over years, means that aggregators will communicate to all of the electric vehicles over years, and electric vehicles finally they can behave for charging, also discharging. And this is the detailed projects, V2G project maps in the world. Currently, we have in Japan, this is the first V2G projects in the world, started in 2010, because the massive productions of electric vehicles occurred in 2009, and we worked together with Mitsubishi corporations on that. And also we have also project in Parker, this is Denmark, and it's quite a big project also. And another topic is also related with the carbon utilizations, because there is any kind of great challenge for the carbon sequestrations or carbon storage, especially for the geological one. How we can guarantee that there won't be any kind of leakage, or how we can guarantee the stability of the energy of the carbon sequestration or storage itself. So in this idea, from 2010, the trend is quite changing, and we are moving to the carbon utilization, how we can have any kind of CO2 utilization in this case, through any kind of materializations, mineralizations, and also in case that we use for the sequestrations, we can use it for EOR, like enhanced oil recovery, or maybe any kind of coal bed methanes. And also, I think when we are doing now energy transitions, I think it's also coupling the forestations with any kind of energy transitions. Also, I think it's quite a good idea, especially like some Asian countries, tropical countries, whether in Asia or now maybe in southern part of America or something like that. I think this is also a big opportunity to couple the forestations and also with any kind of energy transitions, because during the energy transition means that also we still emit the CO2. And yeah, I think that's all my presentations today. In case that you have, I think, yeah, I really welcome any kind of comments and also suggestion from all of you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Aziz, for your very insightful speech here. So I would now like to open the Q&A/panel discussion session, because we're a little bit over time, but at the same time, it's always I really hate interrupting people who are so passionate about their speeches. So that's why I always let them talk. So thank you very much for that. So we already had a few questions in the chat, which I'm just gonna pull out, and I would actually might ask the people who wrote those questions to repeat them themselves again, because it's kind of nicer than just me talking all the time. So we have one question, the first one from, sorry if I pronounce the names wrong, from Chula University, Dao Janja.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe you could ask your question.
Oh yeah, thank you. So I'm wondering, what is the role of the heavy metal in the battery, like the platinum, or yes. Maybe I don't have like background in chemistry that much. Thank you.
So that was actually a question for Dr. Leif.
So do you mean the cobalt in the battery?
Cobalt, yeah, yes, right.
Yeah,
cobalt.
So that's part of one of the electrodes. So in a battery electric, in a lithium-ion battery, on one side you have graphite, and the lithium ions, like the lithium atoms, sit in between the layers of the graphite. Graphite's like a sandwich, and the lithium atoms go like in between those layers. Then when you charge it or discharge it, the lithium ions kind of go through an electrolyte to the other side. And on the other side, you have cobalt and nickel and quite complex metal oxide electrodes. So it would be cobalt oxide and nickel oxide. And often there's many, many different elements inside them, depending on who makes the battery. So yeah, and on that side, then the lithium ions kind of bind with those cobalt and oxygen atoms to make a new type of material. And then that's a reversible process, so the lithium ions can go back to the other side afterwards. So yeah, it's an electrode material. I hope that
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And then we had a question from Juan from the Universidad San Francisco de Quito. Would you like, so he's asking, what have you heard about the solid state batteries from Toyota, others coming to the market soon? So Juan, maybe you would like to.
Yeah, so I was hearing the buzz on the news, and I didn't know, you being nearby Japan, if you had some newer stuff to share on that.
So yeah, I didn't know much about them until your question, but I did check after your question. Yeah, so it seems like so these solid state batteries, one of the issues with lithium-ion batteries is that they have some liquid components inside them, and that's one of the things that can lead to leaks if you pierce the casing, and can cause fires and things. So these solid state batteries are supposed to be much safer. Also, they should be able to charge much more quickly, and so basically overall they're much more good for commercial applications compared to conventional lithium-ion batteries. So yeah, it seems like, according to the news reports, that Japan and also Germany and some other countries are ramping up for commercial production of these batteries now. So maybe soon or even already, the factories are already kind of producing these things. But yeah, looking at the news reports, I mean, you have to be careful of hype with these things as well. Same with fuel cells as well. Of course, the companies are going to like present the best side of these batteries. So I'm sure they'll be very useful. Maybe they won't be quite as kind of amazing as everyone's making out, like fully charged within 10 minutes for the whole system. But yeah, if they are, then it's going to be quite game changing for battery electric vehicles. So yeah, hopefully they'll do very well, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice question there.
Wonderful. And then I have a question from Christina Schönleber from APRU. Christina, maybe you would like to read or say your question by yourself again.
Yes, yes, I will. So I posted it a little while ago, but I thank you. Actually, for all three speakers, thank you. It's been really super interesting to listen to all three presentations. And I was very surprised I had no idea how hydrogen was generated. I thought it was a completely green or renewable energy source, which clearly it's not from the presentation that we just heard. So, but then it was also very interesting to hear that there's other research taking place to use sewage, for example, to create green hydrogen, which sounds really interesting. And I wanted to find out how far advanced this is to push towards green hydrogen. Is it just the one station close to the university, the one fueling station, or is there really a drive can it actually be going into production and rolled out regionally, nationally, globally? Yeah,
so maybe I can just jump in. And so yeah, there are various different ways to make hydrogen. It's kind of very fundamental atom. It's the most abundant material in the universe, like atomic hydrogen. But to make dihydrogen molecules, there are many different ways. So yeah, steam reforming is the main one. Like by far, it's the biggest way to make it. So it's generating CO2. It's very bad. The next kind of sort of technology would probably be electrolysis. So you take water and you put two electrodes inside made of platinum. You supply a voltage, and then you can generate hydrogen and oxygen. maybe that's the next kind of big technology. It's already commercially viable technology, but scaling it up to the levels we need is very difficult. The next kind of technology after that may be this kind of more bio generation of hydrogen. It's a slower process, and you need kind of large areas to do all this effectively. But yes, I think it's not viable now, but it's definitely one that we need to put a lot of research into. It's maybe the greenest way to generate hydrogen. But yeah, it's certainly not good for large-scale hydrogen production right now, hopefully in the future. If anyone else wants to comment, that would be nice.
Yeah, maybe, thank you for the question. Maybe I could just add a few thoughts here. So yes, in Japan, we have lots of experiments. So definitely, please don't have the impression that, so-called green hydrogen is just like the occasional demonstration plant that's on like a university campus that's for research. We actually have several of these sites across Japan, and there are different formats. So Dr. Leif just described a moment ago the idea of using electricity to sort of separate the oxygen molecule from the hydrogen molecule in water, electrolysis. And we have the world's largest electrolysis project actually in Fukushima, and that involves solar PV array. That's about 10 megawatts. And so, it's a significant volume of hydrogen that's produced there. I don't know the numbers, I forget them, but like Toyota Mirais, like, several dozen of these can be fueled every day, for example. However, the costs are extremely high. This is still a so-called demonstration project. So, but we have different countries like in the race to sort of, really scale up this green hydrogen. And so we have countries like, Australia that have these massive, land resources, these amazing solar resources that don't have a way of exporting this so-called, energy to other countries. So we just had in Dr. Leif's presentation a moment ago, like the idea of using ships to produce hydrogen that would transport hydrogen produced in one country and exporting that to another country. So basically, this is accelerating around the world. Japan is really sort of trying to build the infrastructure of including these ships that would, gasify and transport the hydrogen. And we're looking at sort of different ways of producing that hydrogen. So one of them involves coal, which many people think is dirty, which it is. However, if the carbon is captured there, then most of it's going to be clean. But there's also that same technology can be used for really, really much cleaner hydrogen, for example, coming from hydroelectricity, coming from wind turbines, and coming from solar. So there is a race around the world. And right now, it's kind of like Japan is kind of like a leader, but Germany I think is very, very quickly going to overtake Japan. And the difference is because Germany uses policies to build markets, whereas Japan uses technology. It's the starting point is waste technology. So there's a bit of a difference, I think, in how different countries are approaching this challenge. And the final thing I would like to say is that what's really important for green hydrogen is having lots of cheap renewable electricity. And again, Japan is not really a leader there except for solar, whereas other countries that have invested earlier in renewable energy have an abundance of this now, which is a great resource for making hydrogen. I'll stop there. There's a question, sure.
I don't know.
I just would like to add.
Maybe first, Dr. Aziz.
Yeah. It's okay, or
yes.
Yeah. I think because one of our research in our laboratory is correlated also for hydrogen productions, and we call it as the chemical looping technology, which is the technology which can produce the hydrogens and also separate CO2 simultaneously. And I think as Professor Trencher mentioned previously that yes, Japan actually now is still working hard on hydrogens, large-scale hydrogen productions, and also storage and also transportations. And I think some other countries actually are still waiting on that. And as I know that now one big project of NATO in Australia to produce hydrogens, but it is not renewable hydrogen. It is still coal-based hydrogen productions. So the produced or the converted hydrogen from coal will be liquefied, and then and also maybe ammonia will be also the another options for hydrogen storage and transportations. And there will be the target is that from 2025 we can have any kind of large scale hydrogen production and transportation, and that will be intercontinental transportations. And we can measure the price or the cost for the total hydrogen production and also transportations. And in our our previous research also, we have measured also the cost for the hydrogen productions and also storage, and we found that ammonia without decompositions, so it means that ammonia which is directly utilized for any kind of power generation or etc., shows the lowest cost, the total cost of hydrogen itself, but that will be followed by any kind of liquid hydrogens. I think that's the things that I just would like to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think, Christina, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, this is really interesting because Professor Trencher, you also just mentioned, I mean, this is all, I mean, all of these comments and feed into one thing, but I mean, you just mentioned that Germany, maybe Germany or not, but they're good to use policy to create markets. But in your presentation before, you showed that they're clearly unable or not very competent in pushing forward the use of hydrogen fuel vehicles, because there's not the infrastructure there, nobody wants to use them, and so on and so on. But then, but if they're pushing forward for the use of green hydrogen, then this is not used for transport, I would assume. Then they have other plans. What are the
well done. Yeah, well done for catching on to sort of the contradiction here. Yes, so they're looking more at heavy industry and also heavy duty applications, so like trucks especially. So yes, the idea is that you know, sectors like steel especially, there's a need to decarbonize these sectors. So they're kind of, you know, so-called hard to abate sectors. And right now with, you know, renewable electricity, there's been a large focus on electricity generation, but we know now we have to shift to these other sectors that use heat especially, or use fossil fuels per se, because of the carbon content. So steel manufacturing is a big area there. So I'm sorry, I don't know the details, but from what I understand, Germany and the European Union are looking to sort of force these steelmaking sectors to start using alternative technologies, including hydrogen. So yeah, it's a little bit different to the Japanese approach, which has just been to sort of give all the money to R&D and to demonstrations. The idea is to sort of drive technological innovation through regulation and policy that then creates a demand for technology.
Wonderful, thank you. Did anyone want to add something here? If not, then we okay, Stephen, yes.
So yeah, I think it's important to remember that fuel cell vehicles and mobility, I think that's kind of a showcase of the potential of hydrogen, but it's only a very small sector at the moment. There are so many other applications of hydrogen. So just because Germany, for example, isn't investing heavily in the fuel cell vehicles now, or not successfully, it doesn't mean there are not many, many other applications for hydrogen. It's a kind of a replacement for the flexibility of fossil fuels, as well as a storage medium for electricity. So yeah, it's not just mobility.
Yeah, just it is very interesting. And one of our project yesterday, there was any kind of press release from GST, and when our project SATREPS project has been selected. And what we are doing on the project is that we are doing the co-firing. I think we are also collaborating with some Japanese companies, and the trends currently, one of the utilization of hydrogen is in mobility, but also another big consumptions of the hydrogen-based fuels will be the power generation itself. So in our big scenarios currently is that how we can actually minimally co-combust or co-fires together the hydrogen-based fuels into the existing power plants. So there are minimally currently we have two different scenarios. We would like to co-fire the ammonia with the coal, ammonia produced from hydrogens, and ammonia is co-fired to the existing coal-fired power plant. So it means that we can reduce the coal consumptions and also reduce also the CO2 emissions. And another options is that, and it is we are working also with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. The target for the Mitsubishi Industries is that replacing the currently running gas power turbines with fully ammonia-based fuels. So in this case, basically ammonia is produced from hydrogen, so it means that it will be totally carbon-free. So that's why I think in case yeah, Japan's actually, we have three, Japan currently has 3 different demonstration projects for this kind of co-firings. And now some countries, especially like some countries producing ammonia, because like Indonesia, Malaysia, and also some other countries, they have quite established ammonia production systems. And that wise, some Japanese companies basically now currently they are focusing on how to replace the currently running gas-based power generation with fully ammonia-based power generations. That is things that now currently we are still working on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I also saw that we had a comment from Timothy from Kyushu University. He was kind of pointing out the French side. So maybe you would like to share your comment here with us.
Yeah, sure. It was more not really a question, just more something I wanted to add to Mr. Trencher's very interesting presentation. It's so you talked about Germany, but I also believe that France in the coming years will be a major actor in hydrogen technologies at least in Europe. But yeah, I know for a fact that in many cities they are trying to implement more easily and with less cost hydrogen-powered buses. There is a very recent taxi company that made quite a bit of noise a few years ago in Paris that's been doing very well to selling their trips and all of their cars are hydrogen-powered, and now they want to go in other cities like Lyon and Marseille. Yeah, similarly, big companies, big automotive companies like Michelin or Faurecia, which also specialize in energy, associated to create another company called Symbio. By sharing this effort, money, and knowledge, they are working on improving fuel cells, focusing again for fuel cells for vehicles. But again, yeah, I believe that, and it's also everything is helped by the government. So maybe just because it's a trend, or I don't know, maybe it will change because we have a new government arriving soon. But yeah, there's been a big focus on these kinds of technologies. And so, yeah, I think that because it's more, I think that the French government helps more than the German governments to shift to this focus, that in a few years, France will be a leading country in, at least in Europe again, for hydrogen. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see we have a very nice comment from Noni Nuriani. So maybe you would just comment by yourself. I like it.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I was just thinking like so many shades of colors on hydrogens, and some of them seems to still needing non-renewable energy source and still emitting a bit of emissions. Yeah, just my dream will be just have to open the water tap to fill the car. Yes, my question is, how far are we from that? Thank you.
So, were you able to hear everybody?
Okay, just, sorry, Professor Trenchers, you would like to go first?
Yes, sorry, I just would like to repeat the question. How far are we from what exactly?
How far are we from having only to open the water tap to fuel our cars?
Sorry, I just would like to
Yeah.
mention about the big scenarios in our studies that currently we are still focusing on any kind of gray hydrogen production. So I think we are talking about the hydrogen economy. Okay, for the demonstrations test, it is fine. We can use any kind of green hydrogen in this case, but unfortunately, in terms of the economy itself, currently it is really, really challenging for us. So in our big scenario, currently, especially for until up to 10 years in the future, 2030, we are still focusing on gray or brown or maybe gray, brown or gray based hydrogens in this case. And we are expecting that after 2030, there will be any kind of surplus electricity, and that times maybe the price of the fossil fuels like coals and also maybe gas and something like this will be getting down at that time. So it means, and also at the other side is that we can improve the cost competitiveness of the carbon captures. So in case currently the cost of the carbon capture is about $30 per ton CO2. So how we can reduce this cost of the CO2 captures to about $8 per ton CO2 itself. So according to some resources, especially government, Japanese government's plan is that we can reach this goal in 2040. So in that one, in 2040, 2050, we expect that as the renewable energy also increases, there will be any kind of a huge amount of surplus electricity from renewable energy. And also we can have any kind of quite highly competitive CO2 separations. So that's why we expect that in 2040, maybe we are still planning, we are still dreaming for it, but maybe we can have any kind of blue and also green hydrogen at the times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Greg, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, sure. I guess So I guess maybe we could translate this question as when would many countries in the world have access to sort of nice, clean, and cheap hydrogen? And I think that a lot of the examples today, including the latter example from France and then Germany, Japan, and California, these are from very rich, advanced countries. And I sort of become very worried when I think about the need for global decarbonization. And if we think about countries like some of these countries that are close to the Middle East, the Indian continent, these areas, and Africa, these are very poor countries. But they also need to decarbonize. So to expect them to be able to adopt our extremely complex technologies that we're having difficulty producing, that we're having breakdowns with, that are too expensive for us, and expecting them to be able to use these to decarbonize their economies, I think that's going to be extremely difficult. And so when it comes to costs and technological complexity, unfortunately, hydrogen is very strongly disadvantaged relative to batteries, which are just a much more sort of simple solution for especially mobility. Obviously, heavy duty and also heavy industry is another conversation here. But I just think that it's going to be, my prediction is that first of all, the rich industrialized countries are going to demonstrate how we can use hydrogen in different forms of transport. And then if the developing countries who would in the future become more technologically advanced and richer, then they would sort of look at the different options on the market and I think choose from there. But yeah, I think for Indonesia, Thailand, these type of countries, my prediction is probably that batteries would be more attractive choice, especially because a lot of the driving ranges are very short in these countries, if I'm not mistaken. I think a lot of people are driving around on motorcycles in Indonesia and Vietnam especially. So expecting everyone to sort of buy a Tesla is just not going to happen in these countries, in my opinion. So yeah, that's all I have to say on this. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. We are totally over time. So I would like to wrap it up here once, because we're also going to have our poster sessions in a few minutes, sort of. We're going to kind of skip our break almost. And the poster sessions will also cover a lot of interesting topics on alternative energies, I noticed. So you can continue your discussions in the various poster rooms then. But I just would like to ask our three panelists for some maybe very quick final and concluding thoughts or remarks or reflections on today's talks and discussions. So yes, who would like to go first?
So maybe since I presented first.
You disappeared, so you.
Sorry, I'm having connection issues, so I'll go while I can. Yeah, for me, I think overall, hydrogen's quite exciting. It's a new technology, even though really it's been around for a long time. But yeah, we've got a long way to go. But because it's new, then it's expensive. So for me, I think all these projects we've got now are demonstrations, and we're still at a very small scale. As renewable energy gets cheaper, so I think that's really the key to everything. Renewable energy, solar and wind, as that comes down in price, then basically electrolysis will become more and more viable. At the moment, it's not, but it will do in time and not very long. So I think that the cost of renewable energy is really going to be the driving force of all this. Once renewable energy is plentiful and cheap, then hydrogen will be plentiful and cheap. So this is really the key issue. Also policy. So more and more countries and companies are going to stop producing things like internal combustion engines, and they have decarbonization targets. So to meet these targets, there's kind of no choice as well. we have no choice but to do these things. So yeah, this is important. So yeah, I think that's my overall impression. Thank you. And thanks for the next questions.
So Greg.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I think a really important question for the actors that are involved in the energy system today is what role is there for the companies that have traditionally prospered by extracting and selling fossil fuels? So in other words, oil companies, gas companies, and companies that mine coal, for example, and then all these companies that produce technologies that burn these and are related to these. So when we talk about this so-called energy transition, I think in the minds of many people, these companies that have basically made a huge contribution to climate change, the idea is that they're just going to disappear, and they're going to disappear without putting up a fight, and they're not going to make any ripples in the pond. And I think this is probably a little bit unrealistic. So there's a really important need to have these players involved in the energy transition. And many of these companies have not been interested, for example, in solar panels and wind turbines. And that's because usually these projects have been like at a very small scale. They haven't been very, very profitable compared, for example, to the traditional fossil fuel-based model. But what's interesting with hydrogen is that we have some companies, for example, Shell, BP, and Chevron are three companies that come to mind that are very serious about hydrogen production. And they sort of see this as sort of their way of surviving this low, this transition towards low carbon and carbon neutral energy. And then we also see this happening in countries like Australia that have developed a bit of a, I'm from Australia, countries that have developed a reputation for being very sort of anti-climate, very much committed to sustaining the coal extraction industry. And these countries have become very interested in hydrogen now, because actually hydrogen provides them a way of producing a lot of energy at a very large scale and then exporting it to other countries. And because hydrogen, I mentioned before that it's extremely complex, and it involves very large investments up in the beginning. So it's very difficult for small new players to come in. And that's why, for example, Tesla, these companies have gone for batteries, which is sort of easier to enter the market, but it's much more difficult for new players to come into the market, which is great news if you are a powerful company that's looking for somewhere to invest your money in, because you want to invest somewhere that's going to be safe, that's not going to be sort of susceptible to attacks from so-called competitors or enemies, whatever you want to call them. So I think there are some promising signs that some of these very powerful fossil fuel companies that have actually delayed a lot of the progress we've made towards decarbonized society are actually sort of now starting to become very proactive regarding hydrogen. I'll stop it there.
Great, thank you for this aspect now of the whole discussion. And Dr. Aziz.
Okay, thank you very much. In very short, the first thing is that, as I mentioned previously, that we are now living in transition period. So it is very challenging for us. We have many different options, whether for the energy forms or etc. actually, or technologies. So we have many various options in that, and how we can set any kind of scenarios which is really adaptive, appropriate, also wise, appropriate for the regions. So while also it is very important to facilitate the currently running fossil-based power generations, because we can imagine like in some Asian countries, they just built in 5 years, they just built their coal-fired power plant. So it means that we cannot abandon anyway just in 5 years in futures. So it means that we need to facilitate this kind of investment, while how we can reduce this kind of CO2 emissions. So, and also the second point is that correlated with this kind of transitions, it needs any kind of mutual collaborations, and it will be any kind of international collaborations, not only one country with other country, but also really a mutual and also integrated collaborations among different countries, different stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you for these very wonderful final words. So I would like to thank once again our really, really great speakers today. So a round of applause for everyone. If you would like to use your reaction button, you're very welcome as well. So again, thank you so much. I think this was very, very inspiring for all of us to listen to and to discuss. And if you would like to talk or have more contact with our speakers, I'm sure you can email them and they will stay in touch and talk, continue discussions and talks with you.